Today, I'm going to be talking to you about the best books of 2020, the best books that I read in 2020. These are the ones that I think are worth sharing and that hopefully you can get something out of them, and hopefully you'll be inspired to read one or more of them over the next year or so, if you haven't already. And if you have read them, please feel free to let me know because I'd love to discuss any of them. So these books they tend to be from all over the place, as in all over the world. And so a lot of them are in translation. Some of them have to do with languages as well. Some of them have to do with none of the above, but I still found them quite interesting, and I'm hoping you will as well. And so without any further ado, let's get right into it. So the first book is Memoirs of Hadrian by Marguerite Yourcenar. Now, this book, I actually knew little to nothing coming in. I'd seen it in the used bookstore, and I actually thought it might have been written by Hadrian. And I'm like, I didn't know Hadrian wrote some memoirs or something. I know Marcus Aurelius is famous for it and whatnot. But regardless, obviously, it's not written by Hadrian. It's written by her. And I'd come across it in another book, Letters from Montmartre, which actually we'll be covering later. It was just mentioned in passing, though. And so I really wanted to check out this book. What little I'd heard about it, they gave it really good reviews, and so I wanted to check it out. And so what it is in essence, the memoirs. It will be sort of deathbed letters written by the Emperor Hadrian to his successor, Marcus Aurelius, the aforementioned. And it starts off quite slow and heavy, but you get a lot more used to it, and I feel like it gets better as time goes on. And it ends up being a superb book. It's probably as good as any book of this type can be. It starts off with his childhood and it gradually goes through his life, and it pulls you into it more and more as the book goes on. Let me share some sections that I highlighted from this book that I thought would be interesting. So on page 97, I'm actually reading from the screen because I had these in my notes. Page 97, he writes, I knew that good, like bad, becomes routine, that the temporary tends to endure, that what is external permeates into the inside, and that the mask, given time, comes to the face itself. Comes to be the face itself. Sorry, totally messed up the end of that one. Anyway, another one. All nations that have perished up to this time have done so for lack of generosity. That's on page 114, and this is obviously the version that I have here, which is the version translated into English. I should say it was originally written in French, and I read the English translation. Anyway, these are just tidbits, and there are other ones that I've highlighted that I found very interesting, and regardless, it's not that thin, but if you want to delve into his life, obviously she did her research, and for an extra tidbit, you can go into the afterword, I think it is, the bibliographical note at the end, and it talks about how it took her about 10 years to write this book. It's obviously extremely well researched. And sorry, not 10 years, decades of her life. It took several times 10 years to write this book. And it had been a lifelong endeavor. In fact, if you've heard of her name, it's probably because of this book. And obviously, it's extremely meticulous, done extremely well. And I highly recommend it. If you find any interest, if you come across it, definitely I recommend reading it. Next book. So the next book is called The Art of Learning, A Journey in the Pursuit of Excellence by Josh Waitzkin. Now, I don't have the physical book here because I listened to the audiobook of this one. But Josh Waitzkin, for those of you who don't know, you might have heard of the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer. It's based on a true story, and it's a story about this kid who's a chess prodigy, and they say, everyone's saying he's the next Bobby Fischer, next Bobby Fischer. This kid was a real kid. His name is Josh Waitzkin, and he's a chess prodigy. After this, he became a Tai Chi prodigy, Tai Chi Chuan, which Tai Chi, I assume you've heard of it. And by the way, after reading his book, I kind of became a lot more into Tai Chi and have a lot more appreciation. Before then, I just knew of it as a very slow martial art, but there's a lot more behind it. However, this book I thought was excellent. It had been on my wish list for a while, and I finally decided to bite the bullet and read it. And I think it is a self-help book in the sense that, say, a biography of John D. Rockefeller can be a business book, right? Because it teaches you business lessons. And this one teaches you lessons throughout the book. He talks about his experiences and then extrapolates the lessons he learned from different incidences and accomplishments in his life. Now, it isn't, so if you're looking for a to-do book or self-help book with easily digestible nuggets, things like don't check your email first thing in the morning or never go to bed angry or whatever it might be, then you won't find them here. What you find here in this book is a lot deeper, and his advice is actually to dig deep and find and go inside yourself. Let me share a couple quotes that hopefully can give you an idea, or some of my notes that I took from his book. Children who are told that they are smart tend to go for results, thereby avoiding any challenge where they might fail, while children who are taught to put more effort tend to apply more effort to greater and greater challenges. This is actually called entity theorists versus incremental theorists. But I found it quite interesting. He also discusses repeating what you learn until it becomes automatic. And once it is automatic, then adding to it and repeating again, and then adding again, etc., etc. And this is the way to improve. I like his discussion also about how to deal with distractions rather than trying to do away with them, increase them. Because if you increase the distractions, at a certain point, they won't bother you anymore and you'll power through. He applies this to chess, but it probably translates to a lot of other endeavors. He talks about constraints being liberating. He broke his hand and he learned to compete in Tai Chi with one hand, deflecting with one so as to attack with the other. And so that when his hand healed, he saw it almost as an unfair advantage. And I like this idea. The average person getting an injury would see it as 6 weeks doing nothing, but he and professional athletes in general find ways to take advantage of it. Also, he talks about methods of creating your own trigger. So your own trigger, he talks about for being in the zone, for having the right mindset for stuff. And there's certain ways you can create that. So, you know, at the time, for him, it was contests and competitions, but you can make sure that when you get there, you're in the right zone and you're able to accomplish as much as you need. And anyway, I found a lot of interesting tidbits. Once again, they'll require you to dig deep, but you get a lot out of it, I feel. And so check it out, The Art of Learning, A Journey into the Pursuit of Excellence by Josh Waitzkin. So the next book I also cannot share with you because it's another audiobook, is Snow Country by Kawabata Yasunari Kawabata. And this is considered, so he's a Nobel Prize recipient from Japan, and he's considered a classic in Japanese literature. This book itself was written in 1959, it says. I think it was earlier. That must be the translation. Sorry, I don't have it here also because it's an audiobook, so I can't flip through it. But regardless, this book I thought was written very well. And so kudos also to the translator, Edward Seidensticker, because I thought it was beautifully written. And it made me feel, this isn't the first one that I've read by Kawabata Yasunari, but it is probably my favorite one. It made me feel nostalgic, despite being about a place and time that I've never experienced or even would necessarily want to. But it still gives me that feeling of nostalgia. It's a story about a man and a geisha, that they have a relationship together, even though they know it can never last. But through it all, he's kind of walking throughout Japan and seeing Japan. There are other books, in fact, book by the same author, where he laments the passing of the old ways and the new Western, doesn't like the new Western ways. Here, it wasn't as much of that. There was some of it, but it was more just a journey through Japan. And in fact, it got me very interested in a place called Chijimi, which is a place, and I'll share a photo of it. They have this way of dyeing kimonos using snow. And he happens to see this when he's passing through, and it's one of the things he sees. Anyway, I think it's a classic of Japanese literature. If you're looking for something in Japanese literature, a classic to read, I think it's a great choice. Once again, Snow Country by Kawabata Yasunari. Next book is No and Me by Delphine de Vigan. And this is another one that I read in translation. This one was excellent. It's my first novel by her, and she was recommended to me by several people when I said I wanted some good French literature. I wanted it in French, but I found this very cheap in English, so I decided to get it anyway. By the way, it's the second book of contemporary French literature that I've read recently where you have a genius child who is the protagonist. So I don't know, maybe there are a lot of genius children in France or something. But regardless, it's a story about a child who has an IQ of 160, I think, but also has a lot of OCD tendencies. She happens to meet this homeless girl, lady, I think 17-year-old, called No. and kind of decides to take her in and become friends with her. And it's a light story. I thought it might be young adult, but I don't think so because the ending isn't necessarily happy. Found it very nice to read and a delightful, not heavy book that if you are interested in some contemporary French fiction, I highly recommend this. The other one I read was The Elegance of the Hedgehog, which I also liked. I think I like this one a bit more maybe. Although I did enjoy The Elegance of the Hedgehog. I read that last year. Regardless, I do recommend this. I've heard good things about her. If you have other books of hers that you'd like to recommend, please feel free to let me know. Moving on. So the next book is called A Slow Walk Through Jongdong, and it's by Michael Gibb. So I wasn't sure if I should share this or not. I love this book. To me, it was a great way to travel vicariously during these times of COVID and lockdown. The whole book deals with traveling down one street in Jongdong, this area of Seoul. So he literally just goes down this one street and he remarks on the history and the different things that you'll see on this street. And I basically went to my Google Maps and marked down a bunch of places that next time I'm in Seoul, I'd like to see right along this street. And it's delightful. I found it extremely interesting. Especially, look, I lived in Korea for 2 years. I love going back there. So that was a big part of it, I'm sure. But even if you just want to read about another part of the world and read about some small aspects, just one street in it, I think this could be a great read as well. Also, if you're planning on going to Korea, this could be great. I plan on taking it next time I go to Korea and kind of just visiting the cafes and places he talks about. And because he ties it into, once again, the history, recent and not so recent history of Korea that you encounter while walking down this road. Jongno Road, which is in Jongdong. Jongdong is the area, and Jongno Road is excuse my pronunciation, but yeah, it's the road itself that he's talking about. I won't say much more about it, but just that, feel free to check it out. Once again, A Slow Walk Through Jongdong. I wish he would do this for other areas. In fact, I've heard he has a new one about island hopping in another part of Korea, which I will be sure to check out at some point soon. The Private Lives of the Impressionists. This is probably the book I should have started with because I think this was probably my most impressive book of 2020. And I say this because, and I might be ruining it for you guys, sorry, but because I didn't expect much of it. I had this collecting dust for about 10 years, and so I finally decided to give it a go. I bought it in a museum. I think I bought it in Musée d'Orsay, or oh no, maybe I bought it in Switzerland somewhere. Anyway, regardless, I bought this in some art museum, and then I decided to give it a go. I know next to nothing about the Impressionists. Never, while I enjoy just like anyone else does, I never had any particular love for them or anything along those lines. And I'm pretty much very average when it comes to the Impressionists. But I thought I'd try it anyway. And here, let me read some of my notes. And when I was on page 23 of this book, I already wrote this note. I wrote, I'm on page 23, but I already find this fascinating. Monet, the painter Monet, came to Paris from Normandy and enrolled in an art school where his classmate was Pizarro, the painter Camille Pizarro, who was a Portuguese Jew born in the Dutch West Indies. And they became friends. After a while, another student joined this class called Cézanne, who came to Paris with his good friend Émile Zola, the writer. After going back to visit Normandy and then returning, Monet enrolled with another teacher and became classmates with another guy called Renoir. They then roomed together in order to save on rent, and Cézanne used to stop by all the time. They were also hanging out with Sisley and Basile, and that's it. That's page 23 that I wrote the notes. And then later, when I finished it, I said, and I can't believe they haven't made a movie or a TV drama about these people yet. I have no interest in art. I know next to nothing about Impressionism, and frankly, I just thought I ought to tackle the book because it's been spent 10 years in my collection. Anyway, and I go on to say how I found it an enthralling book, extremely interesting. And it has a bunch of little gems. If you check out on, I think it was page 91, there's a long paragraph on how Renoir, before he was famous, was almost killed by a firing squad and the method in which he got out of it. The book is just full of little gems like this. I really highly recommend this book. And it amazed me that these people's lives are so intertwined Sometimes they just acted like little kids, and that's what they were doing their stuff, doing their art that no one else really understood. And after decades of hanging out together, doing their stuff, getting married, having kids, and whatever, they finally gained recognition. And it's an excellent book, excellent. Once again, The Private Lives of the Impressionists by Sue Rowe. So this is a nice little book. It's called Painting as a Pastime by Winston Churchill. And this, it's pretty much self-explanatory. Winston Churchill wrote this shortly before World War II about painting as a pastime, which is a pastime he enjoyed very much. It also has, at least the version I have, this is an old book, by the way. It's from 1965, reprinted in 1965. The original was whenever it was. Anyway, it has examples of some of his paintings, and he enjoyed painting, and he talks about painting, but also about life in general. There were quite a few quotes that I liked from it, but most of them are very long, so I'm only going to share one here. He wrote, "It may also be said that rational, industrious, useful human beings are divided into two classes. First, those whose work is work and whose pleasure is pleasure. And secondly, those whose work and pleasure are one. Of these, the former are the majority. They have their compensations. The long hours in the office or the factory bring with them as their reward not only the means of sustenance, but a keen appetite for pleasure, even in its simplest and most modest forms. But fortune's favored children belong to the second class. Their life is in natural harmony. For them, the working hours are never long enough. Each day is a holiday, and ordinary holidays, when they come, are grudged as enforced interruptions in an absorbing vocation. Yet to both classes, the need of an alternative outlook or a change of atmosphere, of a diversion of effort, is essential. Indeed, it may well be that those whose work is their pleasure, and those who need the means of banishing at intervals from their mind. Those who most need the means of banishing at intervals from their mind." Sorry. Once again, with the quotes, I mess it up right at the end. But regardless, a bunch of interesting thoughts. It's a very short read. If you do come across it, especially if you can find it used or something like that, I recommend it. Painting as a Pastime by Winston Churchill. The next book is Last Words from Montmartre by Cho Miao-jin. I didn't know much about this going in. I knew she was a Taiwanese author, and she had written this in the 90s. She was also a lesbian, which in Taiwan in the 90s was kind of a no-no. There was a whole thing that had come up. This one investigative reporter, she had pretended to be a lesbian, gone to a lesbian bar, and because of that, she had, I think, taken photos or videos and had basically outed a bunch of lesbians, and a lot of people committed suicide after. There were some suicides after, and it was a big scandal. Anyway, a bunch of stuff was going on. She ended up going to live in Paris, and she wrote this book, which is a collection of letters, that's it, called Last Words from Montmartre. And she writes here, I want to read this at the beginning, right here, "For dead little Bunny and myself, soon dead." She committed suicide 1 week after writing this. This book is a collection of essays, like I said, and which usually I don't like. It has no real plot, which usually I don't like. It talks a lot about feelings, which I definitely don't like. But this book kept me fascinated throughout. And knowing what you know about her life and that she's going to commit suicide soon after, it's not, anyway, the book itself becomes haunting. I think it's sort of what The Sorrows of Young Werther by Goethe was setting out to do, but I found this to do it better and to be more successful. I think she just was a lady, 26-year-old, who was too smart and too passionate and too intense for her world. And yeah, it's not fun, not light, I would say. It's not too long, but it's definitely eye-opening, and I think it's definitely worth it if you come across this. I haven't, on her other book, she wrote a novel actually, that I think was published posthumously after she died, that I haven't read yet, and I look forward to reading it. I think Diary of a Crocodile or something like that, which I look forward to reading. But here, if you come across it, Last Words from Montmartre by Cho Miao-jin, I highly recommend it. So the next book is one I can't show you again because it was an audiobook. In fact, I think it was more like a lecture. It was by John McWhorter, who I know I've mentioned before. He's one of my favorite, probably my favorite linguist around today. And this is my third or fourth book or whatever that I've read of his. I say whatever because it might be a lecture, I'm not sure. Either way, I listened to it. It's called Language A to Z by John McWhorter, and it talks about linguistics and languages and all this stuff. I found a ton of fun material. In fact, I found myself wishing I could listen to the whole book again because I wanted to take more notes later. I was mad at myself for not taking more notes. Here's some of the notes I took. I'll just share some brief stuff. Record, recall, rebel are all pronounced differently if they're a verb or a noun, but they're spelled exactly the same. Record and record, recall and recall, and rebel and rebel, depending on whether they're a verb or a noun. The etymology of eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and hickory, dickory, dock. Well, that part was excellent. I just did a marker that it was excellent. They both come from Welsh numbers, apparently. So we have the remnant of that in English. It's divided into A for this, B for that, C for whatever, and you keep going down. H for Hobbit and T for Tones were probably my favorite sections. Anything by John McWhorter is worth it. If you find anything by John McWhorter out there, I highly recommend reading it. This just happens to be one that I read this year. Speaking of language books, this is another one, and I've talked about this before, so I'll keep this brief. Through the Language Glass by Guy Deutscher. I read it for our translation book club, and anytime anyone's interested in translation or languages, linguistics, this is the first book I recommend because I find it extremely fascinating. Definitely look it up. Through the Language Glass by Guy Deutscher. I'll just leave it at that. The next book is The Yacobian Building. This is my first piece of Egyptian fiction, contemporary Egyptian literature, and I really, really liked it. I found it of all places in the free bin of our Second and Charles, our local used bookstore, and it was excellent. I look forward to reading more. More contemporary like Egyptian fiction in general. This really got me interested in the field in general. But this book itself talks about one building. It's called the Yacobian Building. It uses this building to talk about many different characters, and it's obviously, as you might think, a critique on Egyptian society, the good, the very good, and the bad, the very bad, and anything in between. And it's just a great way to sort of introduce all of that. There were some very uncomfortable moments. In fact, there's one sort of section I sort of skimmed through or sort of skipped because it is quite uncomfortable. But all in all, it was great. I heard they have a movie of this, which I'd really like to see as well. And if you do come across it, I highly recommend it. If you can recommend any other pieces of contemporary Egyptian fiction, please let me know. Because, like I said, this is the only piece I've ever read, and I really enjoyed it a lot. Ala al-Aswani is the name of the author, speaking of butchering names, in case I didn't mention it before, and I'm sure I butchered that name as well, so I apologize if I did. But yes, if you're interested in something new, if you haven't checked out contemporary Egyptian fiction, in fact, anything from North Africa, I'm completely new to. And so I highly recommend this is a good place to start and to check something out if you're curious about it. The next book is The Portable Dorothy Parker. I think it's all of the stuff she's written. This was on my nightstand for a while. I'd be reading other books and then I come back to this and read one or two. It has her poems, it has essays, it has a whole bunch of stuff. I think where she shined the most was in her movie critiques, her book critiques, like as a critique basically, and as a reviewer. She was excellent. The way she could be so scathing, but still complimentary about stuff. I thought no one else could do it the way she does. And there were so many things that I underlined, that I bookmarked, and that I liked. I can't go through them all. By the way, for those of you who don't know who Dorothy Parker is, she's probably, I don't know, she's the greatest wit, let's say. She and Oscar Wilde are probably the greatest wits that we have in the English language. And I know I shouldn't say that because we have Shakespeare and stuff, but they're the ones that I find the greatest, that I get the most out of. And she is, you just definitely see it with all the stuff she writes. Now, and she's famous for her quotes. She's famous for her one-liners. She was part of the Algonquin Table, which if you look it up, this was a collection of very big writers and personalities in New York in the 1910s and 20s, I think. And she was a part of that, and she was very much ahead of her time, I feel, in that sense. They do have a movie from the 90s about her, which I haven't seen, and it looked interesting, but probably if you don't know anything about her, I don't know if you'll get much out of it. Let me share some of the quotes she's famous for, though. I know there's one where because she was accused, along with all the young new writers, of not being very literate, and one person asked her if she could use the word horticulture in a sentence. She's like, I bet you can't use horticulture in a sentence. And she's like, of course I can. She said, you can bring a horticulture, but you can't teach her to think. I think it was something like that. I don't have it in front of me. Obviously, it's also a play on the saying, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. So it must have been, you can bring a horticulture, but you can't force her to think. Anyway, here are some other ones, which I do have quoted. These are from her Goodreads page. These quotes, beauty is only skin deep, but ugly goes clean to the bone. And another one is, if you want to know what God thinks of money, just look at the people he gave it to. And I know there are plenty of others. Anyway, I won't go through them now. What I will do is I'll list some of my favorite poems and essays and whatnot of her. Poems and short stories. So if you want, you can look them up. You can probably find them online. My favorite poems are Resume, Love Song, Observation, The Red Dress, Partial Comfort, The Maidservant at the Inn, Thoughts for a Sunshiny Morning, Second Love, Sanctuary, and Tombstones in the Starlight for The Fisherwoman. My favorite short stories are The Custard Heart and Just Around Pooh Corner. Anyway, like I said, I really like her and her writing. If you haven't heard about her or if you haven't read her writing, definitely look up any type of her writing. If you can get your hands on the entire collection, then all the better. But definitely look her up. She's an extremely interesting person. Last but certainly not least, for me, was A Good Family by So Ha-jin. Ha-jin So, depending on where you want to put the last name. It should be So Ha-jin. She's Korean. Let me read a quote from this book that, again, I have on my thing on the computer. I tend to prefer slightly boring writers. Their work somehow resembles life more closely. And I think I would have to agree. And I think this is one of the main reasons why I enjoyed this collection of short stories so much. It helps to transport you to various corners of Seoul in Korea, and you kind of feel like you're viewing other people's lives. There's no explosions, nothing big, huge, action, riveting stuff, but you just get to see other people's lives, and it's a way almost of getting to see how they are living without actually being there. And she brings you into their lives. Most of them have to do with family life, most of these short stories, and about couples or about people, just in dealing with their families. It talks about family, it talks about deception, and things along those lines. Regardless, I think if you come across it, Library of Korean Literature, by the way, is excellent. They're really translating a lot of Korean literature and trying to promote it abroad. And this, I think, is a good way, if you're interested in doing that and maybe reading a bit more of Korean family life or something like that, then to read this, because at least I found it interesting in that sense. So that's pretty much it. I'm sure I've been talking for way too long. I don't know how long this video will be, but these are my favorite books from 2020. And I hope that you find one or two of them or more inspirational and that you wish to read them. If you do, please let me know and please share with me your thoughts. Please feel free to share your favorite books with me as well, because I would love to hear about them. And what was your favorite book from 2020 or your favorite books? I didn't narrow it down to one. In fact, at the beginning, I wanted to narrow it down to keep this video short. At the end, I decided, you know what? I'll talk about what I want to talk about, and because I want to talk about it. To tell you the truth, if you've been watching all this time, I can be truthful. These videos where I talk about books are the ones that perform the worst. I shouldn't do any videos where I talk about books, but I really enjoy making them, and so that's why I keep doing them. And so that's why I decided, you know what, I'll make it as long as I want, and those who want to watch are free to watch. So thank you if you have been watching all this time. You are the few and the awesome. So without any further ado, I will now end this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you next time. Okay, thanks. Bye. Savedum.